Hello and welcome to the Rugby Ruckus. Ben Kimber here, yet again another week in rugby. Plenty of stories to talk about. Down in Melbourne is Morgan Turanui. Morgs, I'll say quickly hello to you before we introduce our very special guest who was waiting for us because you were late.
Yeah, he's got a couple less kids than me. I was rushing mine off the bed. It's been a long day of homeschooling in the Turanui household, and they don't like getting out of the way this early. It's an early evening for us, so sorry for my tardiness, guys. I'll tell you what, mate. I've got a newfound respect for teachers. I say it every week to everyone I talk to. You can keep that.
Well, for those who are watching us on YouTube, you can see who it is. If you're listening, we've got the great Stephen Moore, former Wallabies captain, an absolute legend of the game in Australia. He's been in the news a bit lately, and we want to talk to him about what's going on in Australian rugby, how he's travelling. But first of all, Steve, how's the family? All safe and well up in Brisbane, I assume?
Yeah, thanks, fellas. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Look, they're great, mate. I think I was saying to you earlier, probably spent more time at home than I have in the last 20 years. So I've been spending a lot more time with the kids, a lot of homeschooling and all that sort of stuff. So ours are 7, 5 and 2. So this week they've slowly started to go back to school, which is great. But yeah, mate, can't complain. It's been a good time with the family.
No, that's exactly right, mate. The way that this is rolling out around the world, Australia's doing quite well. Though the impacts are there, and that's one of the things we want to talk about today, the impacts to sport, the impacts to rugby. Before we do, make sure you get on the rugbyruckus.com. There's plenty of good stories on there. This podcast, of course, will be up there if you want to comment on some of the things that we talk. Morgs, I've got my Bodies in Motion shirt on today, mate. My rugbyruckus.com Bodies in Motion shirt. Steve, that's one of Morgs' catchphrases. So, mate, if you give us a ruckus catchphrase, mate, I'll stick it on a T-shirt for you, all right?
He's used them all up, I think.
I think he might have. Mate, first and foremost, it's a tough follow-in. We had Eddie Jones last week, and he was fantastic. Eddie Jones, we talked through some of the issues in the game. He talked about the structures that he'd like to see. Mate, as an influence on you, what was Eddie Jones like for you as a player coming through when your interactions with Eddie?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your chat with him last week. It certainly took me back to some really good times, but also, as Morgs would have alluded to, Eddie was a fairly intimidating character. I was only 20 when I came into the Wallabies squad at that time, and there were some pretty big characters in the team as well. And I agree with Morgs what he said last week. I would have loved to be coached by Eddie later in my career. I think he was a really exceptional coach for senior players, and I think he's at his best coaching world-class players. Eddie wants to be the best in the world at everything he does, and I think that really comes through when you hear him speak now. And he is right. He has definitely matured and developed as a person and as a coach, and I think in a really good way. To be, in my view, he's one of the top coaches now in world rugby, if not world sport, and he's always trying to get better. I think that comes through loud and clear with Eddie. He won't leave a stone unturned to become the best in the world, and that's his benchmark.
Mate, if he was coming on the program now, if I had him in the waiting room, would you be nervous, like Morgs and Gits get?
Yeah, I'll never forget. I think we were at the Crown Plaza or something at Coogee one time, and there was a little meeting room next to the reception there, and everyone would wait in the lobby to go and have a meeting with Eddie, and people would be fine beforehand, a bit nervous, but then you'd see players coming out just absolutely covered in sweat. Guys like Matt Dunning, and it's like they just had a shower, So everyone used to say with Eddie, just always go in with 2 positives and 1 negative, because if you were too negative, he'd say you got no confidence, mate. You can't play, mate. And if you were too positive, it'd be like, mate, you're full of yourself. You're never going to get better and all that. So it was always a fine line with Eddie. But one thing I enjoyed about him is he wanted to be the best, and whatever it took to get there, he was keen to either do it or learn how to do it. And I think now he's got to that point where he's got a really good idea of what that looks like.
Morgs, did you get any feedback on last week's show, mate? Any people talked about Eddie?
No, everyone just saying how nice he was. Who was that bloke? Who was the alter ego? No, the worst thing too to squeak for Stevie coming in was being a hooker was the worst position. Obviously, with Beaver being a hooker, and it was probably better if Adam Fryer was in the squad, because that was really his whipping boy. So if Adam Fryer was the hooker in the squad, then you could obviously sort of hide a little bit behind him and be a bit sheltered behind him. But if you're a hooker, it was the worst. Generally before going on spring tour, you'd train at Coffs in October, and Eddie would would grab a hose and just spray water in your face while you're trying to throw and stuff like that. Just had fun with this hookers.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Jeremy Paul and Brendan Cannon for the most time were part of the squad when I was coming through, and Haas, of course. So yeah, we had some great times there. I think we were throwing 300 or 400 balls a day, and half of them with sunscreen on them, and as Morg said, hoses and the Cameron Lilly crap. The physio used to stand there with a hose and put it right in our face. And Eddie had actually let the grass grow a bit longer if we were going to Europe to play on a tour. So that sort of detail is why he's such a good coach.
Good stuff. And another reason I think that we appreciate Eddie's influence on the game is because he does get stuck in and he cares about it. As he said, he wants the game to grow and thrive, and he loves to coach. Absolutely loves it. So we all want to see the game in Australia come through this crisis in better shape. Stephen, you've been quite famously now the last couple of months a member of a group of captains who put together a letter, sent it to Rugby Australia, calling for significant change. Tell us, how did that come about? It came as a bit of a side blow, I think, to the people in Rugby Australia, and it was certainly a surprise to some people publicly when it happened. How did that happen, and what was the driver that brought that group together?
Yeah, look, for a lot of us, I think it's probably been building in different areas for quite a while, and obviously, Rupa as well. We're talking to Rugby Australia about what the future would look like for the professional players in the game, and there was a decision made between all of us that we would put something together and put it to Rugby Australia around trying to promote some change. And I think it comes from a genuine place and a place of care for most of us, and you don't take those kind of things lightly. Like it's not something you decide really really easily. It takes a lot of thought, and we've all put a lot of our lives into rugby and been lucky enough to play for our country, and some guys for a long time. And I guess we're all just, looking from afar at the state of the game currently and the opportunities ahead of us. So, it's something that, hopefully was taken in the right way. People are going to interpret it in different ways, and some of the players chose not to sign it, and that's fine. We fully respect that. But really what we wanted to happen was for the right change to happen, and hopefully that started to happen.
I think one of the criticisms initially was that the letter called for change without being clear enough on how or why or what. Is that something that you guys addressed or realised perhaps you could have done better that first time? Yeah,
I think, look, you don't have all the details straight away, and I think the conversations will happen around that, and some of them are already happening. And there's different people that have come and gone in that period that would be obviously part of those conversations. So we hope that dialogue remains open, and we're always here to help. So no one has all the answers. Not one person has every single answer to all the issues, but I think between all of us, and when I say us, I'm not talking about just the captains, but all the stakeholders in the game. I think there is the answers there, and you see that. You only have to read what people say and the interviews that you guys have done to see so many good ideas out there. But it's how we harness it. And I even think at the moment we're still quite slow to react to what's in front of us, and I haven't sensed the momentum for the right level of change to happen over a period of time, because a lot of the issues we are seeing at the moment have been there for quite some time. And I think we've been really slow to react.
You talk about those issues, mate. What do you mean? What are the sort of key planks that were of concern?
So I think it's been widely spoken about. I think the performance of the Wallabies is number one for me. I think I see in the Rugby Australia strategic vision is for the Wallabies to be the best team in the world, and that is the right strategy. So we should always want to be the best in the world. And I just, even in my time playing, I didn't always get the sense that we had that desire from top to bottom, and it takes that to be the best. It's such a competitive environment. If you don't have,
when you say top to bottom, you mean top to bottom of the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely, and the players are part of that as well, a massive part of it. And I feel like at times we've been just slightly off the pace, sometimes really off the pace, but other times just not quite good enough, and that's why we haven't been at the top. That's why we've failed to take that number one mantle for a lot of years now, and I don't at times, see the desperation to make that right across the board. And I think if the Wallabies are the best in the world, a lot of other things go well for rugby in Australia. It drives the whole participation. People have got posters on their wall. People are coming to games. Sponsors are involved. The economics of the game start to be a bit more compelling. So for me, that's the number one, KPI, whatever you want to say, but that's the number one thing we have to get right. And then after that, our professional game has to provide a compelling value proposition to the people who are funding it. So the competition structure, what that looks like at the professional level is really important. And there's no doubt that we let Super Rugby get to a point where it was no longer the value proposition that it was when it started. When it started, it was the best thing in town. And we just didn't always reinvent it to look like that or to keep up with what viewers were demanding and what the audience was looking for. And I think we let that get away from us to a point now where we're in the situation we are, where we're not quite sure what it looks like in the future.
Yeah, I could certainly hear some themes in there that I know Morgan and I've talked about. One of my consistent points has been that lack of feeling there was a clear vision or strategy of where the organisation was going or how it intended to get there. And I think it's a fascinating sort of environment where we see guys of your standing in the game, and Nick Farr-Jones, Bill Kearns, and that come out so strongly. Morgs, as the general manager of the Classics, you're in touch with a lot of Wallabies. I mean, how did this sort of affect the wider group of Wallabies, if I can put it that way? Because we saw other guys come out and say this wasn't the time to do it, or it wasn't the way to do it. Morgs, what was the reaction amongst the Wallabies in your area?
Yeah, well, I think I think everyone, we've actually gone out to our alumni and asked them their opinions for just solutions. We went out and said, if you've got some written solutions and ideas, send them in and we'll present them. And that's been done with the Rugby Australia board to provide solutions and to say. And a lot of guys just went, you know what, I'm here, I live here, I put my hand up. If you want help, we're willing to help. So almost in terms of the common theme of what the captains were saying, it was almost like, those times where you go to Stephen Moore in 5 years. Well, Stephen, mate, why don't you ever do anything for the game? And what you don't want is someone to go, well, they never asked me. So the good thing about these captains is they put their hand up and said, you know what, we agree with everyone out in the marketplace, in the rugby world in Australia, that things need to evolve, change, improve, get better, right? And the Classic Wallabies group are all the same. For whether the captain signed it or not, they all know that has to be changed. Paul McLean, he knows that there needs to be change, and there's some confidence in the Classic Wallabies group that he can contribute that change as a Classic Wallaby, as a respected person in the game. I think for the Classic Wallabies and everyone as well, I think it's really important. This isn't about state lines. This isn't about voting member unions, power blocks. This is about the game as a whole. And if we can get past that and try and be altruistic, and I think the lucky thing about the Classics is that we get to say yes to a lot of things. We go everywhere, and we're generally just about kids having fun playing the game. We've been lucky with Squeak. He puts his hand up to come out to some pretty difficult places to get to regionally. There's Wallabies and then there's Wallabies. There's blokes like me who played a few tests, and Wallabies was one of the best things that happened to me. But then there's guys that have really contributed to the Wallaby jersey. Stephen Moore, famed career, great captain, putting his hand up to contribute, helping kids, but also saying, you know what, if you need a board member, if you need someone to contribute at the top end, I'm here as well. So I don't see how we can not use those sorts of resources. And I think that some of the captains' intent to help is the wider Classic Wallaby group as well.
I think the other thing that I still get a sense of is, Morgs just mentioned it, but the state, the battle lines drawn by Queensland, New South Wales, I think that still comes through in a lot of the dialogue, and it shouldn't, because that, in my experience with the group, that hasn't been something that's been spoken about a lot, and that's not the reason why I'm involved. I might live in Queensland, but I want the Australian rugby to be successful and the Wallabies to be the best in the world. So sometimes we've played the man a little bit there when we haven't looked beyond that to actually what the issues are. So there's an opportunity for us to probably look beyond that a bit more, but it's a bit of a baked-in mentality that we're finding it hard to move away from.
I think that's exactly right, Stephen. That was some of the the sort of the stuff that Morgs and I are trying to work through in this pod lately is exactly that, which is this is an opportunity. This needs to be different, right? There is an opportunity to really change things. And if there are things that have held the game back, what are they and how do we move them ahead? And I think to what Morgs is saying about the Wallabies too, I think we're reasonably unique as a sport in a lot of ways, in that you don't see this many, ex-players concerned, associated, attached to the game. Like the soccer in Australia is in a lot of trouble, but we aren't seeing or hearing a lot from ex-Socceroos who still feel that attachment to the game. But maybe I just don't see it because I don't see enough of the media that goes on. But it feels like it's something reasonably unique. Now, I just want to get one thing out of you on the way it came together, because for me, I agree with a lot of what the captain said, and the thing I challenged at the time, the thing I was critical about, was the timing. Right. So my question is that you said it sort of came together over a period of time, and then COVID hit. Was COVID, the impact of COVID, was that the thing that spurred you guys to say, shit, we've got to do something now, because this is a double blow on top of where we thought the issues were in the game. This is really going to bring us down. What brought you guys out to do that then?
Look, I don't think there was any discussion around the timing of it. I think people just felt the urgency of it was such that it had to happen at that time. Otherwise, we weren't sure what was going to happen beyond that. So I think the decision was made to come forward and promote the need for change, because I feel like after the World Cup, for example, we should have had a massive look at how we operate the game at a professional level. And we did a bit of a half-baked review that we never got to see much out of. And it was really an internal process that no one really had any accountability for. And they're the kind of things that build up over time that you think, you know what, I'm not sure if we're actually really trying to be the best in the world here. And if we are, then what are we doing about it? And they're the kind of things that people get frustrated by, because dropping out in the World Cup quarter final for Australia, that's a bad outcome. So that should elicit a really urgent action, and people want to see that. Like, otherwise, we're becoming used to mediocrity. We're just happy to be there, and we should never be like that in Australia. We should always want to be the best in the world, and the Wallabies at the moment are a fair way off that. And I don't know. I just feel at times like we're not urgent enough about fixing that.
You guys definitely came out and said, look, it wasn't about one person, but it was about a change. And I think you talked about getting independent experts and people associated with the game together to try to bring it to a head more, to say, right, where does the game need to go? You point around the report that was done too. I would definitely say the last 10 years in Australian rugby, I feel like there's been 6 or 7 of these reports done, third parties, analysis of what could, should, or might happen in the game, and it doesn't feel like there's been enough meat on the bones of that, or enough direction taken out of those to actually go somewhere. Was that one of the things you guys were calling for, getting some more independent people involved from different parts of the game? I think I read.
Well, I think that certainly helps, and also the players have a role to play in that as well. Like the players are a big part of how the game operates and the success the game has. So there should have been, I suppose, an opportunity for that cohort to be involved in a process beyond that. I don't know. I wasn't involved in it, so I didn't really see too much of what went on. But it felt like it wasn't the review that was needed for the game. Because as I said, the World Cup was a point in time, but some of the things that we're talking about now have probably been at play long before that. I think I saw Sterling mentioned something about 2007 and the need to have done something really major then, and that's 13 years ago. So we're not talking about new things here, and we haven't been successful for a long time. So we might have been second or third in the world for a long time, and that's admirable, but we can't be happy with that. Like, it's not acceptable for us to be anything other than the best team in the world, and that's how rugby in Australia has thrived in the past. People don't want to see the team be second or third. They want it to be the best, and we have been there before, and we can do it again. So what does it look like? What are we doing to get there? You know, what's our what are all our systems and pathways? And you know, the team last year, they came second. You know, that was great. It's happened before, so we've always done reasonably well in those tournaments. You know, so we want to see those players go on to play 50, 60, 80 tests. You know, so they're the kind of questions that I would find at the moment hard to answer.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who've been around the game for a while, some of this can feel a little bit like the same themes come along: the governance of the game, the structure of the game, the way the grassroots plugs in. But I think one of the things that we got out of talking to Eddie last week too was, you know, making that really clear, the really clear points Eddie made around the right people in the right places could make a difference. So my feel, Morgs, from this conversations that we're having is that while it might feel hard and difficult and there are challenges there, there's not necessarily a panoply of things that need to happen to fix the game.
Yeah, I think, and the key also is the right people, but also the right structures in place around to allow them to succeed. We've had, Australian organisations present at World Rugby comparing the systems and governance and pathways of all the different nations, and Australia weren't in a positive light. And then the Australian representatives there told him never to say that again. Don't ever present like that again because you're embarrassing us. So the idea of this independent review has merit. So the interesting thing is now is whether, well, that group of captains, but also all of us, whether we think with the change of the natural evolution of the change of personnel at board level, what will look like one huge change at Exco level in RA in terms of administration and possibly more to come, and an interim CEO followed by a new CEO, whether the change in personnel is enough to have some sort of independence to review it themselves, or it's still needed to have some outside eyes. You know, the hardest thing in Australian rugby too is to find unbiased opinions. You know, Squeak mentioned the biggest one, the state lines. We're often divided, especially at the governance administration level, at state lines. And the more we talk about this time in Australian rugby, the more we talk about self-interest. But finding people that are genuinely unbiased, that can look at it objectively, that don't have the political play. I actually find that Rob Clark's one of the few that probably does. When you put your hand up and say, I don't want to be the CEO, it's actually quite a powerful way of being able to execute change. I'm just trying to do this for the game, and people can believe him for that. If we can find a few more people like that to contribute to some sort of review, pull out the 8 reviews we've had in the last decade out of the drawer and see what they said. I think Accenture did one. Look at the RBIB report, put them all together. And there's a crazy idea. Ask the players what they thought of the World Cup campaign and when it can be where it can be improved. I actually think we probably thought, and a lot of people were saying, we should do a review at the end of the World Cup. And I think the noise was, we did a review 12 months ago, and we already know where we're going. And I think the fact that the coach was changing was seen internally as, that's enough. We're going to change the coach. That'll change everything. And I think that's shown since, as Quick mentioned, probably since 2005, that's not enough.
Yeah, and look, Czech's been one of the most successful coaches that Australia's ever produced in rugby all over the world, so he can coach. There's no doubt about that. And he's proven very, very good coach. So I agree with Morgs. I think people put a line under that and said, well, that's fine. That's finished now. So everything will be fine. And, I rate Dave Rennie very, very highly. I think he'll be an excellent coach, and he knows what it takes to prepare really good sides with world-class players. So that's a positive step.
But is he set up to fail? Here's the thing that we need to know. If the system's set up so that it doesn't matter how well he goes. We reference Benny Darwin a lot, and maybe it's not as simple as some of the things that Benny Darwin talks about, but he's actually saying that every coach since Rod McQueen has probably performed at the expected level, right, consistently. Now, whether it's that simple or not. So, if the system's set up that Dave Rennie can succeed, and we've got the right person in the right place, and I think, Squeaky, you and I will agree that Scotty Wiseman or Chris Webb, Dean Benton, John Pryor, Matty Taylor, they're all positive appointments. Whether you think, they're successful CVs everywhere. We talk about a body of work, Benny. They've all got it. So the right people in the right place with the right environment and structures around them that will allow them to succeed, to give them a chance. It's not as simple as, well, let's go get Steve Hansen and Wayne Smith and they'll fix everything. It doesn't work like that.
There's no doubt in Australia we've underinvested, or we haven't valued the importance of physical development and physical performance in our rugby. And I think Eddie mentioned it last week. Like rugby now is such a power game, and your physical attributes and how you develop them over time are a massive contributor to how well you can play the game at the highest level. And then, you know, what type of nick you're in, you know, that's really important. So you'd have to, you know, you'd be asking the question, how badly are we going to want it going forward, so that we prepare to be the best in the world. And then if you do that often enough, generally you'll get there. So, you know, I think there's a big onus on the player group now going forward to put a line in the sand and say, we want to do everything it takes to be the best in the world. And that requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of discipline, a lot of hard work, all those things. And if we do that, I think that starts to turn the wheel in your favour, you know, that you can actually start getting some good outcomes. And there's a very fine line between just wanting it, you know, a little bit, but wanting it a lot is different. You know, it requires another step change in how professional your organisation is.
Do you, Stephen, are you specifically saying that you think that, you know, as a sport in Australia, we haven't been as fit or as strong as our competitors, that we haven't had, you know, the focus on that physical preparation for what has become a power game, so we haven't quite been up to the mark?
Yeah, I think we certainly, I think there's been other teams that have probably done that stuff better than we have. And, you know, as Morgs mentioned, some of the names there that we're starting to bring now into the game in Australia, there's some of the, you know, the pointy end of physical preparation around the game globally. So that's a good thing. But a lot of it comes from the players, you know, the players wanting it and being desperate to be the best. And with that, you know, you need a really strong leadership group and a core of players that are going to drive those behaviours, drive those standards, not accept anything below that level. And you know, I hope we can build that within our team, you know, because that's something that's every good coach that's ever existed has had a really strong leadership group.
And how much of that is the players versus the structures or the way that it all fits together? And the reason I say that is during Czech's tenure, he would say that the players coming in the Wallaby camp weren't fit enough sometimes, right? You know, and people would say sometimes that's a lack of centralisation and a lack of coordination about the way the players should be prepared, what stage of their preparation they should be at, how, you know, what they should be working on as they get through to the central, you know, Wallabies team. In a similar vein, the way that we develop our leaders and that we develop our the guys, you know, who are supposed to form that leadership core, is that you're talking about the players' responsibility, but is it also then partly about the structure that we put around these guys and the way we bring them together and through our systems?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of all those things. I remember at the Brumbies when Jake White was there in 2013, 2012, Dean Benton was there as well, and we actually started providing meals for our players twice a day, so it, you know, get taken out of our pay, and we employed a chef, and we had meals provided, and we had little signs on the table, you know, educating all the young players about what good nutrition looked like and how to hydrate, how to recover, and slowly that became habit, and that's how, you know, good cultures, good programs ingrain good habits in people, so that you don't have to be told. It flips around so that the players are driving the standards, the players drive the culture and the behaviours that are accepted, and it's very clear who falls in and out of those buckets. So that's what we need to get to, I think. And look, that was 5 years ago, so it's not rocket science, a lot of this stuff. It's just about discipline and that desire and want to be world class. And if we get a critical mass of players in that boat, then away you go.
The theme that Morgan and I have been chasing is the opportunity in this crisis, right? That you know, if you're seeing those things that aren't the way they need to be in Australian rugby, and you're feeling, obviously, as you are strongly enough about to get out there and say something about it, the next question is what, right? What needs to change or what can change? And I think, you know, Morgan, you mentioned the 6 or so different, you know, reviews that might have happened, and the way that some of the leaders said, well, we've changed our coach and we're going to get different coaching in the Wallabies, and that's a step in the right direction. But I think, you know, some of my frustration in the past talking about those kinds of things was saying, you know, that doesn't go to, you know, who's standing up and challenging Sanzar on the Super Rugby product and saying it's not working, right? From Australian rugby perspective, that's what I'm hoping to see now. That's, you know, the changes happen. We've got a new chair in McLennan. We've got a new CEO for a period of time in Rob Clark. I want those guys standing up to talk around what are the things that can be challenged that might have been prior to COVID, things that were in stone a little bit too much. So to that end, Steve, what about the structure of the game in Australia? Eddie talked about 3 teams. We've talked about national domestic comps. What do you think is needed, or what are the things that you'd like to see explored that might get us on a page with something different for the game that might be contributing to that, making the Wallabies the best again?
Mm. Yeah, it's a complex issue, that's for sure. And I think a lot of people have spoken about a national domestic competition with the clubs, and is that going to create a strong enough competition then to be able to feed into the Wallabies, for example? No, I'm not sure about that. I definitely think that probably 3 professional teams in Australia is probably where we meet our watermark. And I think that's where we have 3 really competitive teams. And history would suggest that when rugby's been strong in Australia, that we've had 3 really competitive teams. And as Eddie said, you've got more players playing together. And the other part of that, of course, is the financial conversation. So how many players can you actually afford to pay in Australia to play professional rugby? And that may be a different number to what it was in the past. In the past, we've probably got out and there's probably been players over the last 20 years who have been professional who probably wouldn't have been in the previous era. So the mark to become a professional player may actually go up a little bit and make those teams a little bit stronger. But Super Rugby, I think, there's a lot of work to be done on that competition structure. I think the time zones, the different conferences has created a high level of confusion to the point where people became ambivalent and disinterested. I remember a time when people would be rushing home on a Friday to watch Super Rugby. They'd be rushing home to catch the game. And I just don't get the sense that happens that much anymore. So that game, that competition structure has become a little bit irrelevant. So I think there's club rugby is obviously where the history is, the tribalism, the local flavour for people, not just players but fans in the community. So I'd love to see something worked out where we could have a really strong national club competition that talk to that tribalism. Now, whether that's a conference system with 2 conferences, for example, with a promotion relegation, whether we can make that kind of thing work. But then I'd also be open to a Super Rugby Trans-Tasman type thing with maybe Japan involved as well. So it just depends whether we want to have that international flavour to our offering, and then what the broadcast or what the economics of that look like. Because South Africa and New Zealand, everyone's having their own issues around this. It's not an easy time for anyone. You see New Zealand, the best team in the world for a long time, have got huge financial problems, and they're trying to work out what their future model looks like. I'm sure there's people over there saying, I'm sick of watching the Reds play the Crusaders. I've got no interest in it. So it's not unique to Australia, but I get the sense that if we listen to our base, they're telling us that they want more community club engagement, and if we can get our top players pulling on their club colours, then there's real value in that.
Mate, as a player, are you in the Morgs camp of loving a trip to South Africa with your sunnies on and drinking G&Ts up the front of the plane, or would you have been happy to play a Trans-Tasman domestic comp?
Mate,
going to South Africa had a pretty significant impact on your life.
Yeah. Well, I did meet my wife over there, so
there you go.
That was one good thing that happened over there. But look, I love. It's a great place to play rugby, particularly Test matches. There's hardly anywhere better in the world. But I remember in my last year with the Reds, I think we flew to Joburg, then we went to Santiago, to Buenos Aires, played there, then flew back via Auckland back to Brisbane. It was, and I said to myself, what the hell are we doing? We've just gone however many kilometres and miles around the world to play 2 games, and you just think of the cost of that alone, of lugging 40 people around the world like that, business class. That's just not going to be sustainable in the future. So we're going to be forced into change through the finances and the economics of the game, and I think that's a good thing. But I would have thought this sort of crisis we're in at the moment was a great chance for us to get all our top players out in their club colours, and I just haven't seen or heard anything about that. So I'm not sure what the plan is there. I've not seen any competition being announced, and the NRL starting next week, so they're going to get another jump on us for eyeballs and interest and things like that. So, I'm not sure of what the competition looks like, but we'd be crazy to miss this chance to try something. See if we can get something to work.
And I think you're right there, Steve. You said two things there, which I think are bang on. One, which is, there's an opportunity in the crisis to change things that of course, but also, the world may change to a point where it's just not viable the way it was. It might be that you have to change. We talk about international travel. I think I read in one of the yarns recently about broadcast rights, etc., that Super Rugby was the most expensive, competition in the world to run. Now, I don't mean that from a vast, paid player cost. Like you get an EPL, etc., but just in terms of like the travel involved and shipping around the people is a significant cost. And we're talking about a world where international travel might be extremely restricted for a couple of years. There might be parts of the world that are, this disease moves through, this virus moves through, and you don't quite get back to normal for quite some time. Morgs, we talk about national club comps. Steve touched on, a model which I think Fraser Neal talked to us about. I've seen others talking about, maybe 2 tiers. One of the things, as we talk about, potentially we're better at 3 teams. I think one of the important things is that we don't lose touch with those fans in areas that do love the game. The Force have been put through a lot. The Rebels are there. Canberra's there. But Morgs, how seismic would some of these things be that we're talking about? We're talking about a different structure for the game. Is it blowing everything up, or is it just connecting things better? How seismic do we need to go?
Yeah, well, I think truthfully, if you reduce from 4 teams down to 3 again, and who's to say there shouldn't be 2 teams in the east and 1 on the west coast? It doesn't matter where the 3 teams are. But I think
can't get rid of the Brumbies, mate.
Well, who said it was the Brumbies? That's the other thing. Talk about state lines, New South Wales versus Queensland. It might be the Brumbies plus 1 of them. Let them go at it. That's a real state of origin.
Good luck with that.
3-game series. Whoever wins stays. But that's the thing. It is once again, who do you get rid of? Anyway, I think it's good to tie some of the things that Squeak's been talking about through. He talks about physical preparation and that. It's obviously true that and Beaver touched on it as well, if you have your better quality players playing together more, there's a higher benchmark of quality of rugby, of the quality of the professional player, but also, the standard of physical work and preparation, and you would think the standard of behaviours within those environments. I think the truth is, if you spread your talent, as opposed to having 5 sort of, test standard players or 7 test standard players per 5 teams, if you have 12 per 3 teams, the standard just lifts. It's dragged up. And I love the point about it should be hard to play in those provinces. It should be hard to play Super Rugby. And, mate, I'm in danger of sounding like, a Wallaby from the amateur era saying back in my day. But it's not a terrible thing to be really difficult to make it into those Super Rugby teams. And 3 teams, mate, if you could make Super Rugby, you weren't far. You knew you were right near the Wallabies, and you were playing and training and doing everything next to a high critical mass, as Squeak puts it, level of Wallabies. So, and we also go back to, I'm jumping around a bit, but what Fraser talked about and what some of our smart contributors on the Rugby Ruckus website have talked about, which is high performance and physical preparation, athletic capability could be a really straightforward way of having centralised control, decentralised delivery or execution. So who's to say that Dean Benton shouldn't be writing and controlling every single piece of athletic development our Super Rugby teams do? And we don't need, heads of performance or whatever the name these guys have at Super Rugby anymore. We just need strength and conditioning coaches who are delivering a centralised program to a minimum standard. Now, I'm sure there's bits and pieces of that going on, but Squeak alluded to the Brumbies. The Brumbies' huge point of difference, I think, since about 2012-13 has been their athletic department. They've been physically a better squad all the way through. When you look at all the benchmarks, and once the data and GPS data was being shared at the national level, Brumbies as a group were so far ahead of the other teams when it was 4 and 3 other teams. That was their huge point of difference. Talked about the tactics of the Brumbies and the coaching and this and that. Yeah, that's all elements. But they were hugely superior as a group. And that shouldn't be the case. And it also shouldn't be, that's our point of difference. There should be centralised control is dragging everyone up to that level. And then the difference is your tactics, your technical aspects and those sorts of things. And I understand why the Brumbies would warehouse that, because that was their point of difference. That's how they won. And then going through that, I think, obviously I've sort of half brushed your question, Benny, getting through it. But I think, harnessing what we have is not a seismic shift in the game. Going from 190 professional players to 120 professional players, they'll still get 29% of player-generated revenue. What will happen is the best players will actually get paid more, because at the moment you have, say we call it 6 real professional teams in Australia. The 4 Super Rugby teams, the Western Force and the Wallabies. If you went down to 4 professional teams with that much content, I don't think it's a third reduction in revenue. I think we went from huge quality of good luck getting a ticket to the Waratahs on a Saturday night at the footy stadium and having a great night out with your mates in Padda. We went from 3 teams high quality. We went for quantity. And we're probably a really understandable error in that, we're looking for a national footprint. We just won the World Cup in 99, Lions 2001, World Cup hosting 03, Brumbies win the comp 04, Tars make the final 05. Of course you go to 4 teams. But then the world changed, salaries overseas picked up, and it just pulled the heart out of our playing group. So let's just write that. Let's just fix that mistake, and let's just go to 3. This is the time to go to 3 financially. There is some strong data that suggests it will help the Wallabies be a better team. And let's give this national club comp a crack. I love the idea of promotion relegation, having played in Europe, that, wherever you were in the table, whether you're in the middle of the table, you're often looking up, but you're often looking backwards as well to see what was down there. So you've got your relegation games and your promotion games and your finals games. There are no dead rubbers, which does happen towards the back end of Super Rugby. In the end, you're playing games to, win games. Everyone wants to win. They're professional. But, imagine your club's fighting for survival to stay in Tier 1, or you're a team in Perth trying to get up into the top level of national club comp. I think there's merit. I think it's time to be brave and courageous and try something. And it's time to really forget about state lines and think, national rugby first. Not just Wallabies, but the national game first. And the point of difference too is around the struggles around travel and stuff. And not forgetting that we are one of the 2 international games. That is our point of difference. If we try and go toe-to-toe with League and AFL around a national comp as our be-all and end-all, we'll just lose. So, but if we can combine the best of both worlds and keep the international nature of our game, obviously, global environment permitting, I've got a great sport that I can support and my kids can play and grow up and watch.
Yeah, and I think to that point, we've got places like Perth, they may not have the force, for example, in our Super Rugby comp, but we need to be able to promote the growth of their local club competition, and for that to be really strong. And you combine a good, strong club competition in a place like Perth or Melbourne or Hobart, wherever it might be, and then Perth gets a Bledisloe Cup game, where that becomes the real highlight of the rugby calendar over there, in a brilliant stadium, and it's a sellout. And that's how rugby gets back on the radar in Perth, and then that has value to people. And the other places we need to look at is in the bush. And Morgs mentioned earlier that we've been to a couple of places in the last few years with the classics, and some of those places are rugby places. They're very, very strong. Central, West New South Wales, Queensland, country Queensland. I think Gundawindi, Toowoomba, the greater Darling Downs area, and we've neglected those areas, and they're really important rugby places. That's where, if you look back through the history of the Wallabies, so many of our best players have come from all those towns. So we want to make sure we keep that, because rugby's really regressed in some of those places, and it's a real shame.
Guys, I'm just going to take a slight turn for a second. I saw. Did you guys do Broncos when you were training? I don't know if you saw that story today about Bowden Barrett. Bowden Barrett did a Bronco at training, which I think it's shuttling 20, 40, 60, is it? And
5 times. Yeah.
Yeah. And Morgs, you've been called the fastest man over 3 metres in the game previously. What were your numbers like for a Bronco, mate? Bone Barrett did 4 minutes 12 seconds, I think, was it? Is that what
Yeah,
I
think I was. I think I was around 5 minutes. But I tell you what I did do, mate. This is how serious I am about rugby. My young bloke, what's he, 14, turning 15. They had to do a Bronco in isolation. I said, mate, what do they do a Bronco? Let the kids relax. Anyway, we went and did it, and I paced it out. And I reckon he did like a 4:26, so I reckon I paced it out wrong. Because he's strutting around the house. He said, he's going on. He's not even that good. I must have done it short as that was for me. But we were big on beep tests and yo-yos. I think you had to do a 13-3 beep to make the Australian sevens. So I think I made that and collapsed, and Glenn Ella put me on the plane to go and play sevens. So that was as good as I went. Yo-yo wasn't too bad as a test. I didn't mind it. Short, sharp, painful, but it was good.
How were your numbers, Steve?
Yep. I've forgotten about that part of my career, mate. It was never much fun. But yeah, it's a good. There's no hiding in those tests, particularly when you come back from holidays. It'll be interesting how all the players start presenting. I think someone mentioned, might have even been Eddie again, and it might have been someone like Craig Bellamy maybe around, how your players front up after this extended period of training from home will say a lot about how much they want it, how much they want to be the best. And that'll be interesting to see over the coming months.
I was going to use that as a bit of a segue to New Zealand. A bit of a bugbear of mine has been that, I said I've got a 10 and 8 year old. The amount of top class footy they get to see in terms of rugby is so limited. 6, 7 Waratahs games a year. Some of them at the good times for them, others not so much. Steve, would you see that if Australian rugby hasn't been in a great ebb the last few years, and some people say that getting into a trans-Tasman competition with New Zealand would mean that we just get touched up all the time. Like, do you subscribe to the theory or the thought that that would actually be a more of a making of Australian rugby if they had to play the teams that have been setting the standard in Super Rugby more often?
Yeah, absolutely. If we get our model right around how many professional teams we have, I think even this year you saw. I get the sense that New Zealand are also grappling with a depth issue in their Super Rugby teams. That you look across their teams now, there's probably not the depth of world-class players that they've been used to having over the last 15, 20 years. And a lot of those players are choosing to have, sabbaticals and the players coming through, there's probably not that level of world-class players. So I felt in the games this year that we were quite well matched to the Kiwi sides, and we even had some good results. I think maybe the Rebels beat the Highlanders down there in Dunedin. Yep. So that's those results are really positive. But we're only going to struggle if we're not good enough. So it's our issue, not theirs. So it's how much are we going to improve and make sure that our teams are up there with the best in the world. This is the conversation I've been, trying to push is being world class means that your national team's world class, and probably provincial teams are pretty close to that as well. So if you're world class, you're going to be able to compete with anyone in any competition.
Absolutely. Matt, I want to get just to an issue that popped up this week as well, closer to home. We had the 192 players, or we thought we had 192 players in Australia sign up to the pay restrictions to get through the period. Queensland has had a bit of a blow-up. Well, I could call it a blow-up, but it certainly was unforeseen. We've had Rodder Lucas Hockings come out and they've now been stood down because they've declined to take the pay cut. How big a deal is that up Queensland way, mate? Just talking outside and not knowing all the detail, in this current environment, in this current COVID environment where everyone's being asked to do things and people are being asked to stay home and people are losing their jobs, it doesn't read well from a media sense. I can absolutely give you that. And I think I saw a couple of ex-Reds up there giving, Greg Martin, I think, gave them a bit of a touch-up and said they've let their team down. But what do you see on this issue? What's going on there?
Yeah, look, it's a surprise because obviously a large number of players have decided to take a certain position, and there's quite a small number that haven't. So obviously they're going to stand out pretty clearly. They've all got the same agent who I think has history with the Reds, so that's not an insignificant point. But I do think that we've got to be careful being quick to jump to a conclusion around this. No one really knows any of their situations, what their motivations are. I think that we just need to take a breath here because people just don't have the facts as to actually what the mechanics of all this is. I think players are going to be on the 60% reduction till September, and then after that, I'm sure they'll have to work out. It looks to me like maybe this World Rugby loan that's come in may be used as a bit of a bridge between when those sort of 60% restrictions come off and the new broadcast. So there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty there for players. I do agree. Yes, it's a bit different that they've decided, compared to all the other players, to not take that, to take the same path. But I also think I'll be very reluctant to jump down their throat about it because I just don't know what the situation is, and there's that much uncertainty, and we've allowed it to get to this point where there is this uncertainty, and this is what we're going to find now. We've seen players starting to sign overseas already. There's probably other deals that have already been done that haven't been announced yet, and this stuff is going to keep happening now. So it just depends, when and how much. That's a bit of a reality for us, unfortunately, the situation we're in.
Mm. Well, because these guys do stand out like sore thumbs at the moment, but it feels like a possibly a bold move as well, because there is still uncertainty around the world about what may play out. I've seen talks of cuts in English Premiership budgets, how this lack of travel, etc., may hit different markets, different financial implications is yet to play out. Surely.
Yeah, I reckon those Premier League boys might be okay for a while. I think they should be okay, hopefully. But this is an interesting one because, sort of RA and Rupa both dealt, you would think, in good faith and thought this was all put to bed. And also without knowing the detail behind that exact agreement, the percentage was trumpeted. And I'm not even sure of the hard date of when it's supposed to end. But these players, I think, are back training yesterday or today. And we talked about we're not sure what kind of competition they'll be playing. We're all assuming it's going to be probably a 5-team, 10-week competition running from late July to, July, September, I would have thought. And then trying to get some, I would have thought, Bledisloe games in would be probably our best chance for this year. So then that content that rugby's desperate for is also about getting broadcast money in. So when that broadcast money comes in, where does that money go? The players are playing, the cost of the competition being put on is covered, but where does the money go? I suppose if the players are the ones back playing, I would have thought that they would be thinking, well, we would need some sort of share of that pie. And as we know, we don't have detail. We don't know, is the Force going to be involved? Are the Summers going to be involved? How does that revenue share work? What will Patrick Delaney and Fox Sports pay for that? We might be sending all of our players back to club level. If Fox said, that's not Super Rugby, we don't want to pay for it. We don't want it.
They contractually do not have to pay, right?
Because I wouldn't have thought
they've been promised
a
product. They've promised the junior internationals, whatever it might be, all the way through, and they don't have them.
But we're all assuming that they need content, and you know what? Maybe do they need to buy? I'm not sure how it works, but do they need to buy Super Rugby Australia to be able to televise Super Rugby Aotearoa, the New Zealand version? How does that work? Is it packaged together?
So it would be.
Said, it's always hard when you don't have the full picture.
Yeah.
And so many other of these machinations are happening around these players' decisions. It looks terrible. And if you're in a team, it looks terrible. It doesn't help you win games. It hurts relationships with your teammates who, and then now they're not back training. It hurts your Brad Thorne, the very forgiving Brad Thorne, obviously. You talk about, imagine you did that to Beaver, but walking in with Brad Thorne after doing something like that won't be fun either. So there's all these things, obviously, at the football level that you're thinking, geez, at the Reds, it's not fun. But, is their manager trying to place them overseas? What do their contracts look like from September onwards? In that deal, does it say that the pay cut they take now that they're owed later on? Is that going to be paid back, or is it? I remember Queensland in about, I don't know if you were there, Squeak, 08, 09, they did a couple of weeks leave without pay because they, You know, they weren't far off themselves. It's not unheard of in places to do that. And, you know, I don't think every player said yes to that. I think a few players went, well, this is your fault for mismanaging the place. I'm not taking it. So I think this is the most extreme of circumstances with a global pandemic. And I think 7 million or so Australians on stand down from their work or whatever. And it is tough if you know, for people that are buying Wallaby jerseys and spending their hard earned to buy tickets to see their favourite Wallaby, if it's Isaac Rodder, saying, you know what, I'm not going to take a pay cut. So I'm probably paralysed by seeing both sides of this. Once again, just ugly visibility for the game.
Yeah, Morgs, I agree, and I think you know, Steve, your points are right too. Around you don't know what the situation these guys are into, you know, and I think that sometimes the lure of that overseas money, it's a different job than, you know, the rest of us who work out in the corporate world, in terms of, you know, you're expected to sometimes give up the money for the dream or for the love, whereas sometimes the reality for some blokes can be, I'm sure, very different to that, in terms of what they need to do to provide for their families or whatever it might be. Morgs, your question, you know, I'm very confident that Fox will have to do a deal with Australian Rugby, i.e. SANZAR. This is the last year of the SANZAR agreement before they roll into a new one. So for New Zealand's competition to appear on our screens, it'll have to be via a deal with SANZAR, which will include the Australian component. I think the exciting thing that I think, and I'm actually halfway through writing a column. Already got the headline, Morgs. It's Rugby, the right stuff. I'm doing it on the right seat. Bang. But I'm halfway through the column on the right, just talking about how it all fits together. And one of the things that I think, you know, is an opportunity. We talk about opportunity in crisis. Steve, you know, I said my boys don't get to see enough footy. It's never on at the right times. You know, you talked about coming home for the Friday night game. You know, the Friday night game might be, well, it wouldn't be in South Africa, but the Saturday night game might be in South Africa, and my boys wouldn't, you know about what was happening with the Waratahs that weekend. The opportunity, surely, if Rugby Australia and Fox Sports were working together, which famously or reportedly they have not been. I'm only going from what I read in the newspapers now, and some of those newspapers are quite stringently hammering Rugby Australia. But if they were working together, as you would hope to see, when you've got a relationship where you're handing over millions of dollars for a product, where you're both invested in making that product work, the end of this year, this COVID scenario is an absolute free kick to have a go at something new, to put on that domestic comp, to roll it up into something else, to talk to New Zealand, to talk to your broadcaster and say, what will work for you? How about you've got people sitting at home more than they used to be, right? Everyone's gagging for content. And all of a sudden, instead of you getting a derby this weekend and then a derby next weekend, I'm going to give you in prime time these derbies every weekend. And that's actually going to give you a free kick at looking at how we might work together for what something looks like next year. So, if, you know, from Fox Sports' perspective, I could see them going one of two ways. One is just dragging it out, having a crack at something at a reasonable cost this year and seeing what happens before they think about making an offer for next year. Or it might be that if you thought that this was going to be a success, that if you thought, you know, local derbies of our teams were going to bring ratings, then you actually want to make a bid now for your rights, because you think before they actually put too much value into the equation, I might get a bargain here. Steve, what would you think about, you know, that the competition that is proposed? You'd love to see it, surely. Our teams all playing each other for something to get on TV.
Yeah, look, I think I'll probably get more excited about us doing something a bit more left field. You know, I think that, as you say, there's an opportunity to really try something that we haven't done before. I think we're at that position. I think everyone knows what it looks like for Australian teams to play each other. You know, if the Force come in, maybe that's a new initiative that hasn't been there for a while. So, you know, I know I just personally would love us to just have a crack at coming up with something that we've not done before, and maybe it might work. And if it doesn't, you know, what have you lost? You're already, you know, sort of, at least you've had a crack, you know. So I think there's more to it than just, you know, there's a lot of planning and logistics and all these sort of things as well. So that's not insignificant. It's really takes a lot of legwork to put these kind of things together, and they're probably looking at what competition they can put together pretty quickly that can provide some content and also get the players back playing rugby. So I can understand it, and it'll be better than us sitting here talking about everything that's wrong about the game and, you know, all that sort of stuff. I think it's important that we get back talking about the rugby. I think everyone's looking forward to that.
Right, for sure. Morgs, respectfully to the Western Force, are they You've called a bit of global rapid rugby. You've seen it in action. Are they going to be up to the same standard as our super sides, or close enough to make it worthwhile?
I think it'll be close enough to make it worthwhile.
Is Peter Grant still playing over there?
If he's playing, mate, I'm actually pretty fit at the moment. I might go too. I might try that Bronco tomorrow, see where I sit. If I don't have a heart attack, I might stick my hand up. No.
Eddie wants a report on your Bronco.
It'll be a short one. Don't worry about that. Look, I would think it's worthwhile. It's great. More is more at the moment, really, in that regard. But I would think they should be. They're a top-end NRC team. If you're the Super Rugby team, you would hope that they would struggle against our Super Rugby teams. But who knows? Why not get them in there and give it a go, see what it looks like? I thought Global Rapid Rugby was NRC, top-end NRC standard, and then they came out and won the NRC, so that was pretty much fine in terms of a form line. You would hope that is below Super Rugby team level.
Yeah, and you'd expect it to be.
You would, yeah.
So if we're going to start wrapping up shortly, mate, we've covered a reasonable amount of territory. We're calling this series 3 things, right? We're not really hammering people to say 3 things, but is there anything that you'd like to put out there that we haven't talked about yet, or do you think you've covered most of the points that you'd like to see Rugby Australia sort of get at?
Yeah, I think we've covered most of it, Ben. I think it's, there's no shortage of people with opinions and views out there about rugby, and that's always been the case. And people are passionate about it. I do get the sense out there that there's a huge groundswell, or there's a massive latent support for rugby to be a really popular sport in this country, and to do that, as I mentioned, the Wallabies have got to be really successful. That's our flagship organisation. For a country like Australia, which is not a big country, we've had a rugby team that at times in its history has been the best in the world, and that's really something to be very proud of, and we should take that really seriously and do everything we can to try and make that happen again. And as I said, there's not a lot between being second and first, but being first is obviously a much better place to be, and that's where we should be aiming. So all our efforts should be aimed at doing that at the professional level and making the Wallabies the best team in the world. And I'm sure Dave Rennie will be thinking that. I don't think he's someone who aims to come second. So I think you'll see him sort of put that vision out there. And likewise, I think new chairman coming in, I think there's a lot of positivity around what he'll bring to the game. He comes very well credentialed, particularly in that entertainment space. Been in it a long time. He's very well regarded, well respected person in the business community, and I think he'll bring that presence and that authority that the game needs. Because that role at the moment, it's almost like an executive chairman role. It's that important. He's going to have to really roll the sleeves up and get his board working really hard around how they're going to turn the ship around. And I'm sure that we're all out there willing him to do a great job.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And I think one of the consistent themes through there as well is that, Rugby Australia has had the factions. We talked about Queensland, New South Wales. Everyone's going to have to get on the same page now, aren't they? This is the time. And that's what you need, that leadership. If you hope that Dave Rennie can pull those teams together. And I think Eddie talked about last week, he talked about the right coaches getting together and being aware of their symbiotic relationship and, really pulling together. Same thing from a leadership perspective right across the game. Now's the time that it needs to come together properly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mate, I'm going to indulge myself here. I'm going to take a little trip down memory lane because something I blew up about in the past, right? When you were Wallabies captain and playing for Czech, I want to go back and just ask you about a point in time, Clowngate, mate. Now, I'm sure you recall New Zealand media.
Let it go, mate. I
need to know.
Geez.
I need to know. If I go off about something, I need to know if I was just. I need to get into it. New Zealand Herald put the cover up. They drew Michael Cheika as a clown. He came out and blew up. Now, he was, got stuck in and said it was offensive, etc. I think you yourself said you found it was, was disrespectful. Can I ask, honestly, how much of that was playing the media game versus a genuine, deep-seated impact on Czech? And I mean that because he was always so good or made such a point of saying, I will deflect from my players, take the media spotlight to me. And to me, that looked just like a big, nice, fat one over the middle of the plate for Czech to say, I'll bring the media to me. So was it something that actually upset you and the team in any way, shape or form?
It's a tough one. I think for Czech, I think that the overwhelming sense I got from Czech when he was the coach was that he would have loved to have played for Australia. And when I got up that morning and saw that on the front of the paper, I thought, well, he can't actually do anything about it. We are the only ones who can do something about it, and that was symbolic for me about Czech. He gave everything to it, but he can't pull the boots on. I think he felt, when you're a coach, you can do everything up until game day, and then it's up to the players to take it. What happens inside the white lines is completely up to the players. So I think he just felt a bit powerless there. He was obviously getting ridiculed in the press, and I think he was pretty upset about it. But he always gave you that sense that he would have given everything to have the opportunity to play for Australia. He would have played with and against a lot of Australia's greatest ever players and coached them as well. And he never got to play for Australia. And I think that was something that he tried to make that part of our mindset was how important that was and how special that was. So, he was a pretty emotional coach, Czech, and I love that because I think playing for Australia, playing for your country, it should be an emotional experience in the right way, channeled in the right way. And sometimes he would do things that were probably over emotional, like with his golf clubs and burning stuff and all sorts of stuff like that. But there was never a dull moment, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think Morgs, you always make that point, and maybe I was subscribing too much to Czech's tough exterior and thinking that stuff should bounce off him, that it was all too much medium. But Morgs, you always talked about the culture, the cultural approach that Czech brought to that team.
Yeah, I think I said last week about we've had a few Wallabies coaches, Squeak and I think it'd be interesting to see his opinion, but I would have thought that Czech's probably the one that cared the most about. I think I've said 1,000 times on this, but he's cared the most about the fans' relationship to the Wallaby team and the Wallaby jersey of any Wallaby coach, and one that never played for it. Maybe that's why. Yeah, no, it was interesting times. It's funny. I'm glad we got Squeak on because I think it was really important to get a little bit of information and clarity around some of the things that were happening with the 10 captains. I think that narrative wasn't brilliantly managed, so it's good that we get some clarity around, a guy that, in my personal experience, always put his hand up on the field, but continues to put his hand up for the game. When I'm asking him to do me favours for the Classic Wallabies, he says yes a lot, but I'm sure he'd rather not. So I think that's important. And it's funny, I've got a bit of a list at the moment. There's a few blokes that, when we're trying to look for solutions in the game, there's still some people playing political manoeuvres, playing self-interest. So that list is not a huge list, but there's some significant names there that I won't forget. But Squeak's definitely someone who's pretty keen for Australian rugby to succeed. And if we all come from that position, then I think we've got a chance.
Yeah, mate, I think that's exactly right. And I think, most definitely people want change. And it's great to hear from you, Steve, the thoughts you have in the game, and that, you're working up there in the beef industry in Queensland and really caring about wanting to see the Wallabies succeed well past the time that you walked out the door. Guys, look, that was the Rugby Ruckus. That was excellent, Steve. We really appreciate your time, mate. Thank you.
Hang on, that's not how we end, is it? Doesn't the guest just get up and leave? Isn't that how it goes?
Beaver.
Just Beaver to see you later, bang.
And I do need to know soon, Squeak, what's happening with Beef Week next year in Rocky? I hope that'll be all right.
Mate, it is on, that's for sure, yeah. Maybe you should get a booth up there and do a Rugby Ruckus tent or something.
There we go.
Mate, we might have to. There we go.
I'm a beef specialist, mate. I can eat it like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, Beef Australia. Actually, it's on in May next year, May 21.
Yeah.
So
there we go. Actually, one last thing. Where does Squeak come from? For those of our listeners who don't know, mate, where does Squeak come from?
Oh, mate, I've had it since I was 13, actually. It was when I was at school. I was doing a speech in front of my schoolmates and my voice was breaking.
And it stuck with you.
So it did. Yeah, it did. So, mate, I've been called a lot worse over the years, that's for sure. So,
great. Well, look, guys, that was the Rugby Ruckus. Morgs, any closing thoughts?
No, great to have one of the all-time greats on, a champion bloke on. So, mate, there's a lot of pressure on next week. We've got Beaver, Squeak. I don't know
who's
what
up
we're going to do. We might have to give up. That might be it now. We might be done.
Pass.
No, we'll never stoop that low. Gee,
I think we'd run out of recording time. All right. Thank you, guys. That was the Ruckus. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks.